All right. So, welcome to With Your Mind in Mind. We have Dr. Stacia Alexander, and I say her name wrong every single time. I don't know if I'm now doing it. I don't even know why. It's Dr.
So
Stacia.
French or European the way you say it
I
though.
know it just rolls off the tongue like Dr. Stacia, Dr. Stacia Alexander.
Mhm.
She is our clinical director for 2020 Lives Changed Incorporated, our nonprofit. We're trying to save lives and touch people and have these difficult conversations about life. A lot of things are happening right now. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for being our guest. I'm
Thank you for
excited.
having me, Sherry.
I'm excited to have you here. So, we're going to talk today about what is in your wheelhouse, the emotionality of success. And
Mhm.
I'm so intrigued by this topic. I have a whole bunch of questions. We don't have time for all of them, but I'm excited for you to share with us what is the emotionality of success and tell us why you are the perfect person to talk about it.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the invitation as well. So I started talking about the emotionality of success in great detail about 2 years ago, and the reason that evolved from a program that I run annually called August Accountability, and
Mhm.
it's a virtual program. So ideally, you would think I'd be really excited about this year, but all of that it may come up, it may not. I can't hold any promises. But from that, one of the quadrants that we discuss is the professional quadrant. And in talking with people through my private practice as a mental health clinician, I learned that there's some emotionality to success that we're not necessarily prepared for. No one actually talks us through what it will be like to be successful because everyone is worried about being unsuccessful and what all comes with not having enough to provide for yourself or not being independent and not having those resources in order to live a comfortable life. Like we equate comfortable and peace with income and financial stability. So the emotionality of success was like the only thing, the only emotion that you should have when you're successful is what? Happiness.
Mhm.
Like
You would
we don't
think.
have room, right? We don't have room for any other emotion associated with success, but that is a false belief. Like that is absolutely not true. And so I opened up the dialogue with a virtual show, talk show, by talking to people who are deemed to be successful in our communities about what all it actually took for them or took out of them emotionally to get to the level they are, and what does it take out of them emotionally to maintain the success that they've had.
Wow, that's awesome. It's such a great paradigm shift to talk about um, preparing for success. I love the thought of it. I love the thought of being prepared, but like, how can I do that? How can I prepare myself for success? Because to your point, I can't think of anything negative from a success perspective. So, what are some of the things that you teach your clients? Like, how do you prepare for that?
Well, the interesting thing is when they come to me, most of them are already successful. So I'm teaching them how to recognize that it's okay to have negative feelings wrapped up in the positive feelings that they may have.
Okay.
Or the negative feelings are overshadowing the positive because there's so much going on in terms of maintaining that success. So I really help open up the curtains to explore those feelings that they aren't necessarily comfortable with exploring around their counterparts, even in their families, with their peers. They're just not given that space to do that because everybody looks at them and say, what do you have to cry about? What do you have to fuss about? Why are you complaining? Like you're successful in everybody's eyes. Why are you doing this? So they have a platform with me to actually talk about those things. And whether we do it therapeutically or whether we do it in the talk show, those doors are opened up for them to say, hey, you know what? Sometimes I don't sleep at night. Oh, really? That sounds like anxiety. And
Mhm.
then you talk about it.
That makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. It reminds me of I told you that I went to my son's career day in middle school last year. And I'm thinking about those kids in middle school and that same perspective on what do you have to be depressed about, right? Why are you sad? You live in a great community, you go to a great school, you have all of these things. I'm interested to know, do you think it's different from a children's perspective? Because success is to them is a straight A report card and not getting in any trouble and being able to participate in extracurricular activities. So can we talk a little bit about what that emotionality of success could look like for our children?
Right. it's the same level of pressure. You have a student who's a scholarly student and they excel, but very rarely do we talk about what it takes out of them to actually reach that high level of success. So they're not getting as much sleep as their peers. They may not be as exercising as much as their peers if they're getting straight A's and taking all AP classes and winning all of these awards. They may not be eating properly. So these are the things. It's almost like a checklist as a parent. You know, like we look them over and say, hey, do you have on a hat? Do you have on a scarf? You got to choose raining today, right? But rarely do we look at our kids and say, hey, how much sleep did you get last night? Did you drink enough water, you know, over the weekend while you were out? Those are the things that all contribute to their mental health, but we're just looking at the outcomes. We're looking at the high grades. We're looking at their social lives. We're looking at, do they do their chores or not? We're looking at the outcomes, but we also have to peel back the curtain again and look at how did they get to that point.
Right. No, that's good. I think sometimes I think as a parent, I tend to do the same thing. Just look at what's on the outside. Obviously, having the opportunity and being blessed to work with you and do the work that we're doing helps that. So I guess tell me some more about the challenges that you hear in general that people find. Of course, we know the lack of sleep and anxiety and stress. But what are some kind of unusual challenges people find once they are successful, once they've been successful for a long time? What's something that you hear that, you know, would probably surprise us that it comes up as an issue?
Well, one of the things that I can say now, even for myself, is it's the D word, depletion. Like you're just depleted. You're so busy achieving those levels that you look up in COVID-19 when you're given the opportunity to sleep in for a couple of hours, you realize that you're depleted. So I tell people this now, that this is the first time in my 20 years, and it's been over 20 years of counseling, that I've actually counseled people through the same situation that I'm going through myself. If that makes sense. So I've worked with people with grief, breaking up of marriages, kids acting a fool, you know, and I had a couple that are acting a fool too, but it was not the same situation or the same intensity or the same outcomes. But all of these years I've been able to work with people and say, okay, I can keep an objective mind because I'm not going through the same thing, or it's not a trigger for me. Like there's some diagnoses that I don't work with because it is a trigger for me based on how I grew up. So I'm very mindful of that. Well, now we get to this pandemic and I realize, heck, I'm having a hard time too. Like all of these things that people are telling me, that's one of those things that like I have to consciously regulate. So the word that comes to mind with, you know, successful people is depletion. You get to all of these things, you're checking out the boxes, you're achieving these accolades, and then you look up and you're just worn completely out.
Right.
And nobody understands why. Because you haven't been verbal along the way to say, I'm running out of gas. I need an oil change.
Right.
You know, I need to check my gauges. You're not doing anything. You just kind of, you know, maybe there's a mood shift in terms of your tolerance level. Maybe there's a mood shift in terms of anger or sadness or being morose. But most of the time, people don't pick up on that because your outcomes are the same. We're really focused on the outcomes of people's lives, and we don't look at what's behind the curtain.
You know, I think that would bring up a good conversation, and maybe we can talk to some of our like potential partners from a corporate wellness perspective. Because as you were walking through that, I know that some of the most successful projects that I've executed in my career took a lot out of, like, depletion literally explains how the entire team felt, right? And so, you know, that's probably an area of opportunity for a lot of organizations right now, because success looks different even in companies, because the same thing applies. Your C-suite all the way down to your individual contributors are all struggling through the same pandemic, through the same social isolation, and the way that they show up could be impacting others' lives. So if I have 40 people that report to me and I am not dealing well with the fact that, hey, we're still in business, so that's successful. We didn't go bankrupt, so we're successful, but at what cost, right? That's probably a really good question for us to start asking, even, you know, as leaders of our own organizations. Like, are we leaving people depleted? Is that truly a success? Is it an ugly win, right? Well,
I think it's a shift in the community in the business community, in that before you did feel like that the companies would basically just use you up and spit you out, that you were always replaceable.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're seeing a shift towards, no, people are important. Relationships are important for the growth of the company. So while I think it's a slow shift, I still think that there are many organizations that if checked out today, you would be replaced tomorrow. So you see more people who are actually taking their medical leave and using their disability options, short-term disability options in order to preserve their position.
Mm-hmm.
But at least when they call in and say, I'm seeing a counselor, that is a valid point for taking that leave. Where 20 years ago, that was not so. You had to have your physician or the psychiatrist to say, this person needs to be out for it. So there has been a shift in it, which is good. And that's indicative of the work that's going on overall in the mental health community. It's just far more advocates now for it than we had 20 years ago.
That's a good point. I think as recently as last year, I mean, therapy and mental health days were still pretty taboo, right? And it kind of depended on how successful your company was. Like, it's exactly what you're saying. If your company is doing well,
it's an individual. The individual can look bad at you for it, but the company has standards in place that they can't do anything about it.
right.
So I think that's where we're embracing the shift. The mentality is something that'll be years in the making, because people won't even embrace their own mental health. So they're certainly not going to look at you and say, what do you mean you need to come in 2 hours later so you can go to counseling?
Right. That's true. That's true. That's a very positive outcome, I think, and I've been trying to find those every day, like something positive of this. Sleeping is kind of a big deal. I think we've all been used to working ourselves to that state of
depletion.
We've been living on that. And then it's almost a cycle. And so tell me what you think. I think my opinion, I'm just trying to brace this to make sure it's not like a statement, but my opinion is that, like, I almost feel guilty for resting. So in the middle of success, like, hey, I'm doing things and we've got processes are going and flowing. But I slept until 9 today, right? And so it's almost like that guilt or whatever is programmed in. Like, success, to me, it's successful that I don't have to get up at 4:00 in the morning and drive 2 hours to, right? But it's, it's just that cycle of going, this is okay. I probably shouldn't have been going at the rate I was going for as long as I went, right? But I do think that this time is giving people some time to realize that rest is important and eating correctly, and how it impacts your performance.
Right. The silver lining of COVID has been that enlightenment. Is that many of us have sat back and said, I should have been doing things a lot differently, or I could have been doing things a lot differently. And now that I'm given the opportunity, I will, intentionally do that. One of the hashtags of the August accountability that I run every year is goals are important. And so I'm really intentional about people setting goals and staying with those goals and realizing that their goals don't have feelings. Like, you set a goal and just, stick with the intent to actually reach those goals. What I'm now realizing is that the pace also has to support good wellness, overall wellness, in order for you to achieve that level of peace. And so while we have the goals and while we have the plans in mind, our to-do list and everything, really, did we need to get up at 4 a.m. to achieve those goals? Like, did we really have to neglect our wellness in order to reach that level of success that we were seeking? So I think that's the silver lining of COVID, that families are coming together. We're paying more attention to that we're human beings. I don't care what things you achieve in life. At the end of the day, there are some basic things that all of us need physiologically in order to function properly. And a lot of us were ignoring those basic needs.
That's so true. That's true. I think I'm interested when I watch people's like Instagram stories and they're like, I'm baking bread now that I'm home and I've learned to like cook new meals and my children are cooking with me. And it's like, we knew those things were important,
but we just didn't take the time.
We just didn't take the time to do it. We weren't intentional. I think that was a good word to use. Like we weren't intentional about carving out that human to human, engagement. Yeah.
Relationship. Yeah. Because we, like for us, I was really centered on raising the kids. Like all my schedules were like I started at 9 so that I could drop them off at school, and I stopped at 3 so that I could pick them up from school. Like I wanted to be that mom. I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom, but I wanted to be that mom after school. So when they got to high school and didn't need me as much, they were driving and everything, my schedule quickly increased. What I did not realize is that because we weren't going to the lake after school and we weren't going to feed the horses after school, I didn't realize that that was as much for them as it was for me. Like being around water every day was a relaxing, mechanism for me. And so now being on COVID, I've planted gardens, I've done the front yard, all of these things that I wouldn't have done on a Saturday morning because I would have been at event. And so what I told people is that coming out of COVID, a couple of things are going to happen. I'm going to have lost some friends because I won't go back to the pace that I had before. And I probably will, my business network will probably take a hit as well because I'm not going to rip and run like that anymore. I'm just not. In COVID-19, that has been the silver lining, is that I'm actually paying attention to, I need to work smarter and not harder.
Right.
That's part of it. So I haven't been as active on social media. People are starting to reach out and say, are you okay? Like, what do you, like, and that's coming from someone that I posted every single day on like 5 different pages. Like it was like clockwork. And now, the only thing I share now on my story feed is pictures of my hibiscus and my, the peppers are blooming, stuff like that. And because I want people to see that this is my place of peace right now. Like I'm doing counseling, I'm still maintaining my caseload, but I can't maintain my caseload, go through the pandemic like everyone else, keep up with social media, keep going to all of these meetings, and keep my friend network up as big as it was before then, and still have a peace of mind. Like it's just, we're in a pandemic. This is not a joke. And people, really need to take a step back and embrace the time that we have to really reground. I think that's really important.
That's good. That's a good point. The silver lining is a good way to think about it, because I think we don't hear enough of that. We don't hear enough of the positives, right? The social media, the media, news outlets, they're pretty much focused on the sensationalism of the negative. Right?
Yeah, the news of it.
And so it's hard to not be bombarded by that. And so I love that you found that peace. And that you even have that expectation, like, I know I'm going to lose some friends, and I know that some things will be lacking, but I guess if we imagined it as a pie, I know I went through this class called LEAD, Women Unlimited, and it was just like women senior leaders, and they talked about, you get a pie, you have a finite amount of time in a day, and then you had to write down like how much of your time, of your pie, was like your own mental health. And this was like 2-3 years ago. And it was embarrassing then to say, like, I had like a very small sliver that was like self-care. And that was like getting my hair and nails done, which wasn't really self-care. It was just just mandatory. But it's good that we can now sit back and say, now we can decide what our pie looks like, right? To your point, and say, you know what, I'm going to, spend more time with family, and I'm going to spend more time in my garden. I wonder, do you think that does social media give people the opportunity to hide behind the busyness, right? I mean, so some people can see you're successful. You look successful because you're doing all these things on social media.
Right.
What's your perspective of that as like the illusion of success versus the true emotionality of actual success? Like,
I think for some people it is, because some people, their brand is built on their image. And so in order for your brand to grow, your image has to show that there's some wealth there.
Right.
There's not. So the people that I follow the most are the ones who are transparent, if that makes sense. And so that's what I do on my professional social media pages. I try to be as transparent as possible, which is really a shift in the mental health community, because when I started practicing, you didn't tell anybody anything. Like, I remember having probably a 2 to 3 hour conversation with colleagues about whether or not we put our kids' pictures up in our office. Like, do you really put a family picture up in your office? So for years, I never had a picture of my family in the office. If I did, it was little baby pictures of them. It wasn't a full, family portrait or whatever. But now the transparency that is allowed in the mental health community is really what's helping change people's mind towards it. Like, oh, Dr. A is a human being. Like, she has a goofy laugh, and when she falls, she laughs at herself. Or, she was raised in a single parent home. She was abused. So all of those things, when you're transparent with people, they don't come to your office thinking that you're going to judge them. That, every counselor they see is this perfect individual. I have never seen a perfect counselor. I've never met a perfect counselor. Every single colleague that I have has some history of dysfunction, bad choices or whatever, something that compromised our mental health. So if we can remove that stigma of perfectionism, then I think it opens the doors for people to see that this is something that they can do as well. So social media, that perfection that we're getting into, I think COVID-19 helped remove some of that as well.
Mm-hmm. It's been refreshing to see people like some of the celebrities. They're like, "This is me with no makeup," and
they the circle light. I mean,
yeah, I know. No, but it is refreshing. You're right. It's been good to see people just saying, "Here's who I am," because that's what you have. You're in people's living rooms now, as opposed to having them meet in a place and you're all dressed up and you're something other than who you would normally be.
Right.
That transparency, I know it helps me. I love being able to connect with people that, again, maybe it's just via social media. Maybe I've not had a actual conversation, in a while, but it's good to see that people are just like, this is me on a regular Tuesday, tending to my tomatoes. And, and so it does help you not feel so bad, right? You're like, okay, cool. I got tomatoes too. We can spend time doing things that are important. So on that same vein though, I think, I wonder if you have a thought on social media as not a branding tool, because that's true. That's a great perk. Mm-hmm. But from a mental health perspective, I know I personally have a fear that people, that becomes their therapy, right? So social media becomes their catharsis, and like, well, my situation is bad, but it's not as bad as these people's situation, right? Or I can just look up and see if I can find something that talks about, I don't know, whatever the issue is in my house, right? Maybe it's emotional abuse. Maybe I'm in an emotionally abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. So, or maybe I was at some point and I never talked about it, never dealt with it, but social media is now my therapist, right? And so is the success of the industry from a mental health perspective, do you see that changing at all? Like, people are more like, I'd rather log into an app than to go talk to Dr. A, because I'm, I can just check my symptoms against Google because everybody's doctor somebody, right? So how does
that's what, so eventually technology runs out. Mm-hmm. Like, and the good thing is that you do have technology where there are human beings behind the technology. So if they go into an app, they can actually talk to a person and have those counseling services. That has not threatened, what would I say, land-based counselors? But it's so funny to say that now because all of us are working virtually.
Right. There is no such thing as
that. But you know what technology is? It can be used as an escape tool, just like anything else: sex, drugs, racing, gambling, dating. Any church can be an escape. Like anything that you use to take your mind off of what you need to deal with could be an escape mechanism. So I don't necessarily think that social media is more used than other things. I really don't. In terms of that escapism, I just think that it's one of the ways that people will escape. Yeah, they might even get high and get on social media.
I'm sure I've seen some of those posts. So that has to be how they came to be. You're like, what were you thinking? Like, why would you do this?
So while I don't have the data, I would say that people do use social media. Hey, I mean, think about it. Before COVID, how many of us, when we got home from work or when we got up in the morning, we pulled up Facebook, laughed with a couple of friends, looked at what's in the news or whatever, shut it down and start getting ready for the day or start getting ready for bed at night. Like it was just like television. It's just something you do to decompress and kind of separate work from home.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that some people use it to escape, but I think, some people also use it as a way to connect to other people.
Right. No, that's a good point. Yeah, I think we've got to be conscious about it, right? We've got to make conscious choices. I love that you want us to focus on making sure we're prepared for success, because I understand you'll see us after we're successful. So now I understand where you fall in that cycle. But it's a very good point to be conscious of making sure that we don't end up depleted, which was another point that you made, because you don't want, success at the when you're dead won't help, right? If you're depleted, it's not gonna help us at all, right? So I love that. So what else? Anything else? I want to know, how can we get in contact with you? So we want to.
Well, my website is up. Yeah, it stays up. StaciaAlexander.com. www.staciaalexander.com. I do have a Facebook page, but like I just explained, it's not as active as it normally is, but there's a lot of good information on there. That's the one thing about me. I don't snatch down stuff. Once I put it out there, literature, books, anything, it's out there. So that's where you can contact me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for being the ray of sunshine that we have at 2020 Lives. I'm so blessed to be able to work with you and for us to
be on board. It really is.
It's going to be good. Awesome. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being on.
Take care.
All right. I'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.